I was just clutching my head because, again, people were reading this Empire Games as a happy, fun, better timeline. It was originally conceived of as a dystopian one.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Never fear change. Life is too short for fear. Chase what is desired.
I can do this all day.
Would you mind identifying what you are?
We're the best friends squad.
That's what we call ourselves. Sort of like a team.
Welcome to the rodeo. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride.
This is the way.
I have spoken.
Welcome to the Skipping and Fantasy Show. We have a wonderful podcast today with Charles Stross. Say hello, Charles.
Hi, I'm really pleased to be here.
Charles is the author of many novels, which I've been reading for many years, but here we're going to talk about the Laundry Files verse, but not necessarily a Laundry Files novel called Dead Lies Dreaming. So maybe we should start there and explain how you wrote a novel in the Laundry Files verse, which is not actually a Laundry Files novel.
Well, the thing about the Laundry Files, I'd like to start by saying that name was pinned on it around 2007 by an editor of mine at Ace. She also edited Jim Butcher, so I'm never going to live down the fact that it sounds like a sort of cut-price imitation of the Dresden Files. But basically, all series at Ace, running for more than 3 books, were required to have a series title. Now, in the beginning, I was not writing a series. I sat down to write a short, funny novella in 1998 called The Atrocity Archive, and things just sort of snowballed and grew. It was, on the one hand, riffing on British spy thrillers. The Atrocity Archive was very much a Len Deighton novel. And on the other hand, it was riffing off Lovecraftiana and magic as a science fictional system rather than fantasy. If you posit that magic is something you achieve through applied mathematics, when you solve certain theorems, creatures elsewhere in the multiverse listen and maybe obey, then it follows that computers, which can be used as machines for theorem proving and solving, are tools of magic. And firstly, we hit the implications of Moore's law, and secondly, we hit the implications of governments having signals intelligence organizations like the National Security Agency or GCHQ in the UK. So we deal with a British organization nicknamed the Laundry because in the 1940s when it was founded, it was in a Chinese laundry in Soho, which is there for protecting the UK from Lovecraftian tentacle monsters invading from beyond space-time, which, on the face of it, is the sort of thing the government would have an organization for preventing if it was a real threat. And things gradually snowballed. Originally, it was meant to be a standalone. Then it acquired a sequel novella, and the sequel novella won a Hugo Award in 2005. And then I was sort of suckered into writing a sequel novel, and then a third book. And by the time we get to 2019, I had 9 books and 1.3 million words in this gigantic series, which had long since outgrown its original protagonist, Bob, a slightly naive 20-something hacker geek who'd been sucked into the world of spycraft, and who by the current dateline was about 40 in middle management and increasingly cynical. I was also outgrowing the original setup. Let's face it, the social significance of government spy agencies in the year 2020 is not what it was in the year 2000.
Fair.
Yeah, we've been through 9/11, through the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, through WikiLeaks, through all sorts of other strange things. And a lot of the shine has been knocked off it. So I had this setting which, circa 2015, 2016, ran into a direct collision with modern politics. And, you know, if you told me in 2000 when I was getting started that by the year 2020 I'd still be writing it, but it would be political satire, I would have thought you were mad. It turns out the only way to satirize today's politics is with Lovecraftian elder gods in the White House or Downing Street. And, you know, when you've leveled up to dealing with the prime minister, who is an ancient evil, maybe it's time to step back and take a look at what the civilians are doing on the ground. So Dead Lies Dreaming is really a crime caper novel. And one of the side effects of the Laundry Files universe is magic is becoming easier for people to practice. There are more computers everywhere, and for some reason the walls that keep magic out of the world are breaking down. So as part of this ongoing phenomena, people are waking up with eldritch powers, and before the extra-dimensional eaters chew down on their brain, they think either they've been possessed by demons, or they've become magicians, or in some cases they're superheroes or supervillains. We deal here with some millennial kids and young adults who are trying to survive in a very, very hostile environment in London, under the reign of Nyarlathotep, the Black Pharaoh. The motto of the new management, the government he leads, is strong and stable, and it doesn't get much more strong and stable than an elder god who demands human sacrifices and is building skull racks on Marble Arch. Now, this is sort of a starting point. We have this found family, ill-assorted gang of would-be supervillains, rather minor supervillains, the kind who are not exactly up to doing much more than, as a team, robbing the cash room of a toy shop. But they're trying to get by, they're trying to live, and they're living in a London which is dominated by the people with money, many of whom are very, very magically powerful and really quite evil.
Yeah, so let's dive into some of the characters and some of the settings. So the rise of the return of magic through the series has been a theme as more people grow the planet and it grows the attention of elder gods. But Imp and Evie's family, Imp being one of the team of supervillains, Eve being his sister who is working for one of those financial titans, have a connection to the past, to magic, which I found interesting, that they have a history and that's essential to the plot. So how did you develop those two characters and their backstory to tie it into this growing magic? Oh, it's almost like a magic has returned in some sense. So like the magic now actually works better sort of paradigm that you put into the series.
The magic returning thing actually goes all the way back to The Concrete Jungle, which was the second novella in the original book, The Atrocity Archives, where there are hints that magic was actively suppressed during the early years of the 20th century, the modernist era, and to some extent during the Industrial Revolution. There is a implied backstory for magic in the Laundry universe, and what we're seeing in the late 20th, early 21st century is a massive renaissance of magic rather than its discovery for the first time. This renaissance being driven by the development of computing technology. Now, Imp and Eve are descended from a family line of magicians, neuromancers. They work magic through dreams, who, well, I think it was their great-great-grandfather made a very, very inadvisable pact, which he made the mistake of leaving an escape clause out of. I don't really want to say too much more about the nature of the pact,
sure,
except it needs to be renewed periodically, blood is involved, and it's where their power comes from. They are both, to some extent, in rebellion and revulsion against it. It has wrecked their family, but they're dealing with it in different ways. Eve has dealt with it by growing a very, very hard shell and attempting to climb the corporate ladder. And we're going to see more of her in the sequel I'm currently working on, I hope.
Oh, good.
Imp, meanwhile, he has the ability to convince anybody of anything for 15 minutes face to face. And he sort of thinks he's Andy Warhol. He's an art school dropout who wants to make the ultimate movie adaptation of Peter Pan. Now, the original Peter Pan was kind of grimdark. I was working through some grimdark territory of my own when I was writing this. I was commuting every week to my mother's bedside in a nursing home as she was in decline. She died shortly thereafter. Dealing with issues of how you deal with death in the family. J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter and Wendy, and originally the stage play that Peter Pan that the book was based on, this was long before Disney got his hands on it. J.M. Barrie was trying to figure out how you explain to a 5-year-old that their brother and sister are not coming home from the hospital where they've been taken with diphtheria or whooping cough or some other thing that we think of as an eminently forgettable childhood disease these days. Back at the turn of the 20th century, about 20% of children died before they reached the age of 5 years. And while today death in the family is to some extent a big taboo in the West, back then mourning was everywhere. Elaborate rituals of mourning were still around, and everybody had to be aware of, had to have ways of coping with the loss of family members, even people who today we would shield from it completely, like toddlers. To some extent, death was an everyday part of life that they had rituals for dealing with back then, while sex was the great taboo, and to some extent this is now flipped.
It is strange how you look at 19th century Victorian rituals about dying and pictures and now in a century our expectations of what we accept and what we shy away from have completely gone around the bend. In the long historical perspective, it's like an eye blink that we changed our culture so radically, but it's outside the memory of most people that this is the way late 19th century to early 20th people dealt with things and just how horrible it was.
Yeah. Now, Peter Pan, the version most people are familiar with is the Disney version, which is really twee and saccharine. The original version of Peter Pan, he was a sociopathic serial killer and kidnapper of children who was so divorced from reality that his own shadow couldn't keep up with him. He was really not a nice piece of work at all. Tinkerbell was deeply, deeply sinister and deliberately tried to murder Wendy on more than one occasion. And this was sort of an unremarked upon part of childhood literature for 5-year-olds back then. So it was a very, very strange book. And Imp is working through his own family trauma, which deal with dead children. He's trying to raise funds to make his own production of a movie called Dead Lies Dreaming, which is going to be his own personal version of Peter Pan, if you imagine a mashup between Peter Pan, Aliens, and Neuromancer, for example. And, of course, the copyright on Peter Pan in the UK is owned in perpetuity by Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, the hospital for sick kids in London, one of the great teaching hospitals of the UK. This was granted by an Act of Parliament when the copyright on Peter Pan was about to expire. So there is no way in hell that the trustees will allow somebody like Imp the copyright licensing to make his movie. So Imp is saying to hell with them and is at the point of robbing banks for cash to get his hands on the money he needs to make the film when the book starts.
Hence his little team of supervillains where he's the charismatic, can convince anyone anything for a short time.
Yeah.
And then his sister, whose boss wants a certain item, they wind up hiring his team to get the item, and that's basically how the plot runs along the book.
Yeah, I mean, Eve is working for a offshore hedge fund billionaire investor. He's actually a fairly transparent parody of several British political figures if you postulate they get their wealth and their malign attitude from various occult practices. And he's decided there is a book he absolutely has to get his hands on. He orders his secretary to get it for him by any means necessary, where this is understood as a euphemism for and hire the mafia if that's what it takes. And Eve decides that her younger brother is probably better positioned to get the book than anyone else. And there is a gradually explored subplot of abuse in the modern corporate workplace that gets underway in this book, and that I'm going to be playing more with as I unroll what I hope currently will be a trilogy.
Do you see this as more of an offshoot of the main line of the Laundry Files, or is this how you're going to continue? I mean, yes, at this point, Bob is in his 40s, and they're both kind of out of real use as player characters, to use a gaming term, because they're just so powerful. And also, Bob's got the Eater Souls in his head. Yes,
they've leveled up, and so have their threats. What I'm planning provisionally, I can't keep the Laundry Files original series story arc going indefinitely. In fact, I think there's another novella that needs to be written, and there are either one or two more novels. I haven't quite decided yet, and that should bring the story of Bob, Mo, and the Laundry itself to a conclusion. Now, it's worth noting that the Laundry Files works its way towards a Lovecraftian singularity that takes place around May of 2015. So if I mention that Dead Lies Dreaming is set in December 2016, this should tell you where it's positioned. None of the characters from the original series show up in this book or the new books, although there might subsequently be some crossover. This is very much a different story in the same universe. Best way of thinking about it, I guess, would be Deep Space Nine relative to Star Trek.
Oh, that makes sense. So how about Alex, our friendly neighborhood vampire who you introduced a couple of books back?
I don't know. I want to do some more with him. He's certainly a good candidate for a major viewpoint character, and he will almost certainly show up in the last of the Laundry novels proper. I don't know yet the full shape of those last couple of Laundry novels. I was working towards an ending for the series, very much an Italian job ending, because it leaves everything in the balance between the humans and the Laundry and the elder gods who are now running the show. But I'm having to give that a bit of a rethink because, no spoilers here, reality just dropped a global pandemic on us, and I can't be the only author who's going back to the drawing board to rethink an awful lot of plans.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've just had so many shocks in the last few years to make you have to rejigger things. The Trump and Brexit and now a pandemic is like, how do you keep up with an alternate reality that doesn't feel like it's twee or just like not realistic any longer?
I realized I had a bad problem when I learned that people were reading the Laundry Files as consolation comfort reading. You know, this is a universe where things with tentacles come out of the walls and suck your brains out through your nose, and you think this is comfortable? That shows how bad reality has gone.
It is. I mean, but at least those problems aren't real. I don't have to worry about the Elven hosts coming through into Minneapolis anytime soon. Not more for the Oaks and not from here and yet in your no. So we don't have to worry about Leeds taking invasions in our real world anyway.
Yeah, it does make writing near future fiction or alternate present fiction very, very difficult indeed, though. I'm probably not giving too much away. If I mention the Merchant Princes series, I have handed in the last book in the series, Invisible Sun.
Oh, excellent.
I'm waiting to hear from my editor now, but it is provisionally due out next March, assuming publishing timetables don't get totally overturned by COVID-19 fallout. But again, I had to do a bit of rethinking on that because the world is so much more dystopian and crapsack today than it was when I began writing that trilogy, that I felt the need to give it a more positive ending than I'd originally planned.
I mean, that world has Donald Rumsfeld nuking another timeline, so the dystopia is kind of built into that versus DNA and also I mean, you kind of anticipated a lot of the surveillance state that we're now getting now is just part and parcel of that verse in the time frame of Empire games and novels.
Yeah, in Empire Games and Dark State, we have a surveillance state where Homeland Security has responsibility for protecting the United States from threats from all other parallel universes. And some of those parallel universes have fairly scary indigenous powers of their own. They're not all Neolithic tribes. Some of them have nukes. But there's a thing in bureaucracy called mission creep, where you've got a remit to do one particular task, and there are all sorts of other supporting tasks that go with it. Before you can snap your fingers, it's generating more tasks for itself to do as it goes along. And by the time we get into the Empire Games trilogy, there is this vast panopticon surveillance state covering pretty much the whole planet, with a gulag of detention camps, the equivalent of the CIA's black sites in Afghanistan, in other parallel timelines, so that if anybody does escape from their dungeon, they're not going to be able to get anywhere. And I then had to sort of bring this to a conclusion with a satisfactory feeling series ending at the end of 1,000,000 words of the 9 books, but also didn't leave the readers wanting to cut their wrists afterwards, because the first book came out about 3 weeks after Donald Trump's inauguration, and I was just clutching my head because, again, people were reading this Empire Games as a happy, fun, better timeline. It was originally conceived of as a dystopian one. I'm not going to be surprising anyone if I say that after I write the sequel to Dead Lies Dreaming, which is currently half written because I got there on momentum after finishing Dead Lies Dreaming, my next plan is to go back and dust off the unfinished space opera.
Oh, yay!
Yeah, about that space opera. I began writing it in 2016. Its title is Ghost Engine, which was originally going to be the title for the sequel to Glasshouse, but this is an entirely different novel, entirely different setting as well. It would have been published in 2018, except my father got ill and died in 2017. And as I've discovered, nothing derails a writing project or a creative project of any kind like having a death in the family.
Yeah.
I've got enough distance back now that I think I can go back to it and tackle it. I was halfway through a second draft when the shit hit the fan, as it were. That one is set a long way in the future. I mean, normally when people say space operas are set in the far future, I think in a couple of 100 years, maybe a couple of 1,000 if they're pushing the boat out. Ghost Engine is set 2/3 years in the future. There is some availability of faster than light travel, or rather instantaneous travel through wormholes. Humanity has expanded throughout the local group of galaxies, about 50 galaxies in total, and our species, our existence is not remembered directly, but is inferred to have happened because we're the last common hominid ancestor species going by studies of genetic diversity among sentients.
So basically Homo sapiens has speciated out like a bush.
Exactly. This incidentally gets you a really, really nice explanation for why Klingons and Romulans look like human beings with funny face makeup.
Nice. I like it. I like it. I mean, as you say, space opera tends to go a couple hundred years, maybe a couple thousand, maybe 10,000 most. And okay, local group, local arm, maybe a portion of the galaxy. You're going almost Stapleonian in like local group of galaxies in scale, which is really ambitious.
Now, a side effect, it's also set in a universe with no singularity as such, no truly transcendent AIs, no culture minds. But I wanted a playing field the size of Ian Banks's culture universe to set the stories in. And I think I've pretty much got there. But I've still got a whole load of work to make the first novel hold together. The one thing I can say by way of a point of reference, if you remember my novella Palimpsest,
Oh, yes.
from 2008, won the Novella Hugo in 2010. Palimpsest was a time travel novella in which time travel is a scarce resource. There's one time machine that opens wormholes between different places and times, and only one wormhole endpoint can be open at any one instant. So, of course, there's a single authority for operating it. And midway through Palimpsest, our protagonist, Pierce, gets a glance at an alternate timeline where the machine was used for space colonization rather than time travel. And there is no time patrol, but there are human colonies throughout many, many galaxies. And the MacGuffin here in Ghost Engine is so similar it might very well be that alternate universe from Palimpsest.
Oh, that's a nice Easter egg for long-time readers here of your work. I appreciate that they could make that connection to earlier stuff. I mean, you've been writing for so long that's nice to. I mean, it's not like a Heinleinian, like everything's set in the same universe, but there's at least echoes that you can tie back into other things.
Yeah, there were implications set up in Palimpsest. I mean, Palimpsest for novella should be the first third of a novel, but I broke my skull several times trying to figure out how to write the other 2/3 of it, because Palimpsest alone covers a span of 2 trillion years. There are going to be 3 other novellas, but between them form a novel. Palimpsest covers effectively most of the Stelliferous era when stars are still being formed. The second novella was going to cover the period from the end of Palimpsest to the end of the degenerate matter era, to the era around when black holes are beginning to evaporate and pretty much every star in the universe has gone dark. The third one was going to go into the big cosmological distance, well beyond, starting 10 to the 64 years out from now and going well beyond that. But my brain just crashed when I tried to figure out how to make it all work from a human perspective. Because when all is said and done, fiction is the art of constructing plausible lies that illuminate the human condition. It's really hard to write fiction about non-human entities or robots or computers or AIs. And it's even harder if you lose all grasp on anything with a human reference point. You know, if there are no more planets or stars out there, what are we even talking about in terms of fiction? Olaf Stapledon did it, but his books are more along the lines of philosophical thought experiments, if anything.
Yeah, almost like future grand space histories rather than actual people going through time. I mean, he has the conceit of having someone's mind projected back from the end of humanity back to the forward to try to tie it all together, but it is kind of much more like, and this happened, and the paragraph is a novel's worth of ideas rather than an actual narrative of characters and people and their struggles and how you tie it into people today. That's true.
Yeah, I'm not sure Stapledon's work would have been publishable, at least by traditional publishing means, in this day and age. He's there because he's one of the giants of the field and is sort of, I guess, a legacy author, part of a canon. But I suspect what our readers are looking for has changed somewhat. And I don't think look, I have in the past dumped several novels worth of ideas into the space of a relatively short chunk of fiction, but I'm not sure I could do it in a Stapledonian manner without the actual characters existing purely as placeholders. It's not really commercially viable today.
No, I think you're right. What readers want out of even science fiction has changed in the last 10 years, much less 20, 50, or 80 years. And without characters to actually tie into things, people are not going to want to read it. I mean, it's at best, as you say, a philosophical treatise and not actually commercially viable in this day and age. And I mean, maybe he could self-publish it, but 6 people will read it. It's like the exegesis of Philip K. Dick, who's actually read the entire thing without going mad. It's just a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. What is happening in the genre has shifted immensely over the past decade. It's become very, very obvious through the Hugo Awards and the controversy over the attempts at slate rigging of the vote. The puppy groups were pretty much a pushback against the direction that the readership were moving in. The fact that the people who have been winning the Hugos against the wishes of the old school puppies are selling books in large numbers and having TV shows made of their books tells you all you need to know about the way readers' tastes are changing. And I think this is actually good and healthy. It is not healthy for an art form to get frozen in perpetuity in one very stylized mode for long periods. Change is a sign of a dynamic, evolving, healthy literary field. And that's what we've got. The flip side of that is a price that authors like myself pay is we have to constantly struggle to stay relevant, to keep our minds open and to keep seeing how things are developing and to reinvent ourselves. The late, great David Bowie reinvented himself about once a decade musically, and that's actually a pretty good model of emulation for anyone wanting a long-term career as a writer. You've got to be looking for something new to do the whole time.
Oh, I agree entirely. And David, I mean, but there are people who like fix on one particular era of David Bowie, the one that speaks to them, what they grew up with, and that's what they like. And it's hard for readers not to get ossified. I mean, I try to read new authors as much as I can to just not to get falling into the same patterns of the same authors, the same themes, the same ideas, just to keep myself ready for authors old and new to present me with new things, to try to keep fresh and not become an old stick in the mud like, say, the puppies.
Yeah, me too. I have been getting kind of worried and itchy, in fact, about being tied so tightly to 2 long-running series, The Merchant Princes, which dates to 2002, and The Laundry Files, that date to 1998. I'm still in love with the Laundry Files as they have evolved, although they're pretty much unrecognizable from the original books in the current form. But I do want to have room to flex my muscles and do something new. And I'm acutely aware that I'm now in my mid-50s. It gets harder to reinvent yourself as you get older, and especially as you go through middle age and head towards old age. Creativity comes easily to the young.
And being nimble. I mean, it's not impossible, but it just takes longer, harder, and more thought is required before reaching for that next branch on the tree.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a good way to start wrapping this up. So has the publishing date of Deadlight Dreaming changed, or is that still October?
Deadlight Dreaming is still on course for October.
Excellent.
Page proofs have been processed. It is in production. I don't know about Invisible Sun, which kept getting put back. The reason Invisible Sun is so woefully late, years overdue, is because first my editor David Hartwell died, then my father died, then my mother died. COVID-19 came along just too late to kill it again, although it may still handicap its production schedule, but it's on course in theory for next March.
I'm looking forward to it because, yes, you might be tied to these 2 Lauren series, but I do enjoy these series, and I'm really excited to see where you go with the space opera and other things. I've been enjoying fiction ever since I saw in the Barnes & Noble newsletter that first Merchant Prince novel. I was like, hey, alternate worlds, perfect. And then started reading backwards and forwards since.
Well, Deadlight Dreaming is going to be marketed as a Laundry Files novel. I really, really, really wanted my publishers to give it a new series title, but Laundry's got name recognition, so it's a Laundry Files novel. Except it's not really. It's the start of a whole new series.
Yep, and that's the message for readers. It is tied to the previous novels, but in sort of setting, but since there's really no character crossover worth the name, I do think readers can start here if they want to, and they should. Yeah,
it's a fresh entry point.
And that's important for long-running series as well, to have those breakpoints where people can jump in and start when I feel like, oh, I have to do homework. That it can be a turnoff for a long-running series, and some long-running series really suffer for that. You've had a couple of breakpoints throughout the Laundry Files in particular where people can jump in, and I appreciate that. And this is another new one, and hopefully this will bring you some new readers.
I hope so. Thank you for having me.
And with that, listeners, stay frosty, and thanks for listening.
If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/SkiffyandFanty. You can also find us on our website, skiffyandfanty.com, and on Twitter at skiffyandfanty. If you'd like to send us an email, you can do so at skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. The music for this episode comes from Sphere by Creo. You can find out more about their music at freemusicarchive.org.